My philosophy with games with the boys is if they beat me, they really beat me. And I want them to know it. And so that's why I try, and I'm competitive. And since Bernice really wanted a joke, here you go. A farmer in Rhode Island just grew the largest pumpkin in North America, weighing over 2,200 pounds. The only downside, the man's wife no longer thinks it's cute when he calls her pumpkin. So those are the kind of jokes that I tell the boys as we're driving back from hockey. It's great to have this opportunity to do another conference and hopefully expand the impact that we're able to have. We do believe that God has taught us a lot over the last 20 years of this journey of Rock Solid Refuge. And the need for families to be built into, whether a family is in crisis or whether they're just starting out. Families need support and encouragement and help, and we believe very much that families need the foundation of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Just to give you really quickly a little snapshot of who Rock Solid is and what we do. If you're unfamiliar with us, we work with teen boys that are 13 to 18 years old that have life-controlling issues like substance abuse and addictions, pornography addictions, challenging behavior, suicidal ideation, depression, and self-harm. And those things have only ramped up over the last number of years, and so we're staying the course, and we're just hoping that God continues to raise up other people and other ministries to champion the work that needs to be done. We are bringing God's transforming love to adolescents and their families that are affected by life-controlling issues, that they may know freedom, restoration, and hope. That's our mission statement. And so that's what we believe God has called us to do. Now, I have a favorite dessert that I always enjoy, but I wasn't able to bring that, but I have a close substitute, which I do appreciate Tim Hortons. I think it's a good place. The coffee's decent, and I do like their apple fritters. Right? Anybody like apple pie or apple fritters, right? There's just something about an apple dessert. Our 16-year-old daughter, our youngest, she doesn't like pie. Like almost universally, like, what's wrong? Like, what happened to you? But the reason I bring up apple pie is there's an obvious answer to this question. How do we get apple pie? What's the main ingredient? Not a trick question. It's apples, right? You're not having apple pie if you don't have apples. Okay? So how do you get apples? What do you need in order to get apples? You need an apple tree. And generally speaking, like there's going to be an orchard, right? And so we live in a time today that wants good things. But we live in a time that is absolutely rejecting the source of all good things. So we want the blessing that comes with right living and those kind of things, but we live in a time that essentially has said, let's destroy all the orchards and still expect to have apple pie. And that's the time that we believe that we're living in. And so our vision, our hope, and even today, my challenge to us today is that we would get back on the foundation and that we would have a passion and a real vision for our time, to get our culture, but particularly our kids and our homes, back on the foundation of Jesus Christ. We are God's special creation, and we need to understand what our place in the world is and the importance of shaping our children into God's vision for them. Now, teens is who we've worked with, and as Bernice was saying, my wife and I have worked with young people for over 30 years, and it's really been an amazing privilege and blessing, but it comes with its challenges, right? So one day, one of the students was taking the garbage out, and so at Rock Solid, go from the main center and across the yard by the shop is where the garbage bins are, and so this guy's taking the garbage bag, and, you know, best case scenario, you're carrying it, right? But what happens if you drag it? I mean, particularly across some gravel. Does that bag hold up? So anyways, I'm over at the shop for whatever reason by the dumpsters there. And he comes dragging this bag, and he goes and he swings the bag to throw it up in there, and the bottom blows out of it. Right at me. And I'm literally covered with coffee grounds, because that's wet coffee grounds. That's what was in the garbage bag. And sometimes it can feel a little bit like that when we're working with teens. It's a bit messy, right? And when we think about working with teens and what's at the foundation of what we do, we can't be thrown off by the reality that it is going to be a bit messy. In Proverbs 29, verse 18, the King James Version says this, and this is familiar probably to a lot of people: where there is no vision, the people perish. The English Standard Version says, where there is no prophetic vision, the people cast off restraint. So I wonder, do you think we're living in a time when people are casting off restraint? When people, our young people, are perishing? Now, we probably don't have to think too hard about what it might look like for somebody to not have a proper vision for their life or their future and their place in the world. One of our former students, Ty, is going to share his story a little bit later this morning. As he shares, you'll hear a time in his life, and maybe a pretty good chunk of time, where a hopeful future wasn't really a part of how he's seen the world. When we get applications for from parents for students to come to Rock Solid, we read things like this: our son has lost control several times recently. There's been verbal assaults, including calling us hideous names for extended periods of time, trashing our room and damaging our home, as well as physically assaulting and threatening us. In grade 7, he started experimenting with e-cigarettes, marijuana. He had been suspended out of school twice and kicked out of his French class. In grade 8, he started experimenting with alcohol and had more struggles in school. He met a girl and started engaging in sexual activities. They broke up multiple times. He became suicidal when this would happen. In grade 9, he lost a lot of his good friends and started making friends with the same damaging addictions. He started stealing money from us and anything else he wanted, and on it goes. And we see those stories and those applications over and over and over again. And it's a picture of a life that doesn't have a vision. What about things like teen depression and suicide? And when it comes to teen suicide, and I've asked many of the youth at Rock Solid that have struggled with this, do you want to die? Young people don't want to die. They just want the pain to stop. That's really what they hope for, what they want. When I was a youth pastor in a small community in the early 2000s, I came across 4 teens chatting outside the school. And I knew them well because they would come to youth group fairly regularly. And it turns out they were talking about and even mocking another teen that had thrown himself into the fire at a gravel pit party on Friday night. Those are the parties that don't happen in a small town, but everybody knows that they do. As these teens made fun of the teen that was despondent enough to throw himself in the fire, I asked them if they really thought that he wanted to die. Do you think someone would really try to commit suicide with all those people around? Then I asked them this. I asked them if any of them had ever contemplated it. All 4 of them acknowledged that they had. A couple of them had even thought of ways they could do it. Any number of realities in a youth's life can shift the core of their being. When I was 12, my mom died in a car accident. The normal I knew would never return. My teen years were rocky, to say the least. Whatever vision I had for the future seemed to vaporize. My new mantra became maximize pleasure and minimize pain. Here's a cartoon that kind of displays how we might see a lot of the youth of today. So there's 2 boys looking out the window at a bird. See that bird? That bird has more freedom than I have, right? Every young person has this concept of freedom that they want to live out. And, it kind of goes by the, I get to do what I want when I want by, he doesn't have to, it's not really advancing, if you could help me with that. There you go. He doesn't have to go to school or eat liver or memorize the timetable. He's totally free, right? And when we think about that, the definition of freedom that these young people are embracing or wanting to embrace is, I get to do what I want when I want. And so when we think about that, those of us, in this room or listening to this, we all know that if you get a group of people together that does what they want when they want, how's that going to turn out? Is that going to work out? It is definitely not going to work out. So the bird has freedom in many ways. He also has freedom to die, freedom to be destroyed. And that's really what seems to happen in a young person's life that doesn't have a vision, particularly God's vision for them. At Rock Solid, we had a student that was relentlessly committed to bullying another student. And just so you know, this was met with real consequences and direct involvement from the staff to get him to stop. Okay, so we don't just let that go on. It seemed like he felt obligated to pass on the pain he felt from his relationships onto this other student, who was clearly more vulnerable than himself. So one day he needed a ride to town for an appointment, and I was the one who was available to take him. So here he goes. He's got to take a ride with the executive director. And usually there's some conversations that accompany those trips. And because we were dealing with this thing, there we go. So as we drove, we talked and discussed his seeming relentless commitment to bullying. And he was committed to it. He seemed to have no conscience about it. It was just, what he was doing. Now this young man, he said he was a Christian, so I could have this conversation on the basis of his relationship with God. So I asked him, what is the reason we exist? Why are we even here? Even though he was really new to the Christian faith, he quoted from the Westminster Confession and said, the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. This kid was academic. Man, if he read something, he remembered it. Like he read through the Bible real quick. Man, he could find stuff. I was just like, whew, this is impressive. And so we talked, so after he gave me just that little quote, because clearly he'd read it somewhere, and he said, I have no idea what that means. All right. So we talked about the nature of God and being a core attribute of God, being that God is love. And so he said, what is love? That's an interesting question. What is love? Oh, well, we can dig in here, right? So, as we pulled out of the gas station to head back to Rock Solid, I gave him my phone to read from 1 Corinthians 13, a familiar passage on love. So he read it. A lot of us are probably familiar with this. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have a prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but I have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have and deliver my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. Oh, starting to speak to the issue, right? It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And the passage goes on beyond that as well. So after he finished reading the chapter, he said, I have never loved anyone, and I don't think I ever will. This would also probably indicate how he perceived his own relationships. I'm sure he would have also said, I don't know what it means to be loved. So just so you know, and I don't leave you hanging on this, with how things turned out with him, he decided to stop bullying. he decided that, in our conversation, I said, where in that passage does it tell you how you need to feel about this other person? So I guess it doesn't. So just do it. Love is patient. Love is kind. It's your obligation. If you call yourself a follower of Jesus, it's your obligation to live like Jesus, to love like he loved, to just put it into practice. And I mean, sometimes our gut reaction to that is to think, well, that's not very meaningful. It's just really mechanical and it's not from the heart. It's like, okay, but just on a basic level, like God just says, do it. Just put it into practice. And so he began to do it. And without any internal feeling of affection towards the other student, and yeah, the other student really annoyed him, and on some levels it was valid. You know, we're not always impressed with the people that are around us. But he simply began to love him, as 1 Corinthians 13 described. And over the next several weeks and even months, we watched him grow genuine, caring friendships with the other students, including that student that really annoyed him. And real emotional pain even would emerged when someone would leave that he had come to care about. And I think this really surprised him. Okay. So with that kind of example or framework in mind, that God has a vision for us, a life for us to live out, to walk forward, I want us to take a bit of a journey over the next few minutes through two levels of a vision. A micro vision, what is God's vision for us as an individual, and how should I understand our reason for being? And a macro vision of how our individual story fits into God's grand story. See, I'm convinced that the story that we believe we are a part of is foundational to shaping the lives we will live and the choices we will make. The story that we believe we are a part of is foundational to shaping the lives we will live and the choices we will make. God created us as whole beings, so we need to pursue a vision of being well, mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. So coming to understand who we are as God's special creation helps us to understand how we should engage in this world. So as we disciple our children and youth, we should always have this framework in mind: mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. So, mentally, what does that look like? So the next little bit is relatively basic to our world. You bump to the next slide, please. Mentally, what I'm not meaning in this one is mental health, as we often talk about it, but just the reality of challenging ourselves, our brains, our ability to learn and grow in that sense. You know, are you hungry to increase your mental capacity, including a variety of realms? Engage your teens with questions and puzzles just for fun. Do collective projects that encourages development of skills in community. When I was a youth pastor, we would do guys' nights and girls' nights. And one thing that kind of emerged out of that at a certain point was a pretty big project that the guys undertook to build a fairly elaborate skateboard and BMX half pipe with a spine and a roller in the middle, kind of a ramp. And so it was pretty amazing. And so one of the guys, his dad had a pretty cool shop, and so we just went after it. And this was placed at the coffee house, the drop-in center for the youth, and used for years. But it was something that we came together and we were challenged with, and we just went at it and got it done. And so it was a really neat thing to see and be a part of. Emotionally and socially, when we think about who we are emotionally, and this would be a little more related to our mental health, is it our practice to avoid emotionally difficult situations? That can be a natural tendency, right? We know something's going to be difficult, maybe a conversation or a certain person, is difficult to be around, and we tend to avoid it. But how do we build up emotional resilience? And how do our teens build up emotional resilience if we always protect them? And I heard this saying the other day, our jobs is more about preparation than protection. Think about that for a minute. Our kids need to be prepared for the world that they live in. And I'm really looking forward to Naomi's talks as well today, because it's a lot about that. There's a real world that we live in. I heard another speaker say this recently, that we live in the time that God designed for us to live in. And our young people are growing up at the exact moment that God decided that they would grow up in. This is the world that God has put before them to grow up in and make a difference in, for them to impact the world as God calls them to. So how are we preparing them to do that? So our kids and teens need opportunities to grow emotionally. Doing everything we can to remove emotional difficulty will not prepare our teens for the real world that they live in, nor the real adult world they are entering. But they need mentors to come alongside them. We can walk with them through the emotional landmines, but if we only shield and rescue them, they will not build up the needed emotional strength for what life will throw at them. And they might just bail when others need them most, when they're adults. Show them and draw them into healthy community. Not perfect community. Doesn't exist, right? If you ever find a perfect community, don't join it. Won't be perfect anymore, right? That's the way it is. But perfect community doesn't exist. Walking through the challenges of life that inevitably come in isolation is totally different than in community. Physical presence is critical. Don't rely on technological connections. Sometimes that's necessary, but a teen that is physically isolated will often connect with people they shouldn't. And again, I think Naomi's going to share on that a bunch more as well. And they won't learn the soft skills of interpersonal relationships. Our teens need healthy attachments to nurturing adult relationships. And I'm going to share a bunch more on that reality later this afternoon. Physically, tried to go forward. Here we go. When we look around us and even consider our own lives, are we as a society generally healthy? Are we needing medical interventions less or more? I realize that there is a whole spectrum regarding this, and it is good to see a current trend towards more basic health choices like less processed foods and regular exercise. But let's be honest about what we know about baseline health. Is it healthy for a teen to drink energy drinks? Like, period. I'm not talking like, oh, he only has one a day or only has one a month, or actually it's not healthy. Like, there's just nothing healthy about it. Or to vape, marijuana's, it's not a big deal. No, it is a big deal, actually. It's really destructive. How about sitting in front of a screen for 4 to 8 or more hours per day? Already, a lot of our young people are in front of a screen for school, just out of necessity. But do they sit in front of that screen more? This is destructive to their mental and emotional health as well. Our kids and teens were not created to live sedentary lives. So just on a real basic level, go for a walk in the fresh air and sunshine. Invite your teen or teens for a walk. Create an outdoor or indoor youth pickleball challenge. Love pickleball. Anyways. Teach them to enjoy the process of physical activity. Be creative. Look for those opportunities. I know that something like hunting is seasonal, but being out there, being in the outdoors with your kids is so rich. Even when my kids were quite little, they wanted to come with me hunting, and it was difficult because they would scare the deer away. Anyways, how about nutrition? Always quick processed meals are really not good for us. Supplements can significantly help physical, mental, and emotional health. And there's actually some pretty cool supplements that are on the market now as far as even our mental health. And then spiritually, So there are two ways for us to understand this dynamic. What are your core values? And the first is a bit more generic. What are your core values? Have you ever asked a teen what their top values are? Have you ever gone through the process of discovering your top values? Most teens, if you pin them down a little bit, they'll give you some pretty good answers. Family, friends, my truck, or my desired truck, good times, whatever. They probably won't say to you drugs and alcohol, but they'll give you the answers that you want to hear. So in our setting at Rock Solid, every student is assigned a staff mentor, and they meet weekly, regularly, to talk about things and just build a relationship that opens the door to a deeper conversation. So a number of years ago, the student I was mentoring at that time, him and I went for a drive to town to grab a coffee and talk. So I asked him what his top 5 values were. And he knew what I wanted to hear, of course. So he said things like family, friends, money, vehicle, and that kind of thing. So I asked him if I could share with him what I thought his top value was. He said, okay. I said, I think your top value is autonomy. You don't want to be told what to do. You want to be in control of your life completely. He thought about it for a minute and he agreed that that was probably true. It's actually pretty neat when you build that kind of relationship with a young person that they'll allow you to have that kind of a transparent conversation. So we can do this exercise that can help us discern our values, and even with a young person as well. Take stock and track how you spend your money, how you spend your time, and what are the things that charge you emotionally, happy, sad, angry, whatever. And those 3 areas will indicate for you what your true values are. You can say everything you want, but when you do an inventory of how you spend your money, how you spend your time, and what charges you emotionally, those will be the things that are your core values. And so when you take those things and you overlay them with a list that you thought was your core values, it can be quite enlightening sometimes. And it's good for our young people to go through that kind of process. So if you have teens or in a mentoring relationship with teens, walk them through this exercise. Challenge them also to see a vision of 10 and 20 years down the road, and how the values they live by today will greatly influence who they will be. Again, Ty's going to share his story in a little bit, and I remember when he was in the program, I got a whiteboard out, and I said to the students, your parents, they're probably, in their mid-30s to mid-40s. What do you think their lives should look like? And young people all know what their parents' lives should look like, right? That's a reality. So I just started making a list. And I just started making a list. And they had great thoughts on this. They knew exactly what their parents' lives should look like. And then I said, okay, so you're 15, and Ty would have been 15 at the time. All right, so that's 20 years out. What do you think? Is that going to be your life? The list that we just made that you said. You're like, oh, you got me. Because here's the reality. If you maintain the path that you're on, the vision for your life that you currently have, will you end up in the place that you think you want to end up? And unfortunately, so many young people would have to say no. And so they live for a vision that is very short-sighted at best. And it's up to us to walk them through to a vision of the orchard of God that bears the fruit of the goodness of God that He has for us. Now, I want to talk a little bit more of the other side of the spiritual reality, which is, what if we have, or our young person has, a vision and they're actually really committed to it, but it's the wrong vision, like it is. Well, like the student that I mentored, he was committed to autonomy being his core value. His life revolved around, nobody's going to tell me what to do. I'm my own boss, and I get to do what I want. And we all know that that will end in destruction. So what is God's vision for us then? And again, back to that cartoon of the sense of freedom that these boys wanted. Galatians 5 verse 1 says, "For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery." So, God wants us to live free. But what does that freedom look like? In verse 13 of Galatians 5, the Apostle Paul writes this, "For you were called to freedom, brothers, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed by one another." So here's the thing. If we live for pleasure, self-autonomy, and to consume, we will be devoured. It doesn't work. We weren't created for that. We were created to serve in love. That's what we were actually created for. And that young person that didn't have a framework, didn't have an understanding of what he was created for, okay, to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. Okay, that's what I'm here for. I have no idea what that means. Okay, so God wants you to live out an expression of who He is, and He's calling you to love. I don't know what that means. I don't know what it looks like. All right, here's what the Bible says. And he just started to live that out. He became a happy person. Joy became a part of his disposition. It was amazing because he was now living within the reality that he had been created for. When we live outside of what we were created for, it's like taking a crescent wrench and using it as a hammer. It doesn't work properly, right? We were not created to live as autonomous consumers. We were created to reflect the goodness of the God who created us. So how does this come about? This comes about in intimate and personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And in Galatians chapter 5, verse 16, the Apostle Paul writes this, "But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh." So the first and foremost primary foundation of living out the vision that God has for us is to walk with Him. This verse is a reflection of what it says in Genesis, where it says that Adam and Eve walked with God in the garden. We were designed to walk with God. And when our vertical relationship with God is what it ought to be, it lays the foundation for our horizontal relationships. So just like this young person whom I challenged, hey, if this is a certain something, this relationship with God, it has to work itself out like this. And as he began to live in the context of who he was created to be, joy became a natural part of his disposition. And in verse 22 of Galatians 5, the Apostle Paul says, the fruit of the Spirit, in other words, the overflow, is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. We were created for intimate relationship with God, overflowing to this love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, gentleness, and self-control. Think about a struggling teen embracing this vision. Even though they won't, nor will we, live this out perfectly, the radical difference, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, is amazing. Now, maybe you think I'm being too simplistic, but here's the reality. We didn't get into this mess overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight. I really believe that if we don't have the right foundation, which is a right and proper understanding and vision of who God is, who we are, and our place in this world, we're never going to move forward as we ought to. So that's God's vision for us in a micro sense. So what does God's vision look like in a macro sense? The grand story that we are called to be a part of. In Acts chapter 1, there's a description of the time when Jesus has his final conversation with the disciples. And he says, "You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you. You will be my witnesses." And he tells them how that's going to proceed. And as he's having this conversation, he was lifted up, and a cloud took him out of their sight. Wouldn't it have been something to be present at that moment? And while they were gazing into heaven, as he went, behold, two men stood by them in white robes and said, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand here looking into heaven? This Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven will come in the same way as you saw him go into heaven." Now, the angels ask a strange question. Why do you stand here looking into heaven? The obvious answer is Jesus went up right in front of me here. I think there's a reason to stand here and look up into heaven. But the question, I believe, is asked so that everyone who would read this from then on would recognize that God has given us an assignment. That we as adults have an assignment, but do we embrace bringing our kids and our young people into that same assignment? That they have a place in the world that is a part of an eternal story. Their lives are so significant that it matters for all of eternity. Do we help our young people grab this vision for their lives that is so important that by God's design, it impacts all of eternity? So, as we think about our place in the world and our place in our young people's lives, let's give our kids this vision and contrast it to the vision that the world tries to give them. And think about the foundation that the world gives our kids compared to God's vision. Our kids are taught that we came, it went from goo to you. Evolution. We're just meaningless blobs of cells. Somehow, people still want some kind of good or moral code. But again, that's like saying, "I love apple pie, but don't believe we need any orchards." Our kids and teens are being inundated with a lie so grievous that it twists the way we are meant to frame how we understand our existence and what story that we are a part of. So, to close, I would just encourage us to recognize that we're either part of the problem or we're part of the solution. And it's our place to shine the light of the gospel of Jesus Christ and the hope of our risen Lord into every dark recess. First our own hearts, then our homes, then our churches, then our communities, then to the nation and the uttermost parts of the earth. I really do believe that it's Christ or chaos. So let's live out our lives, all of Christ for all of life. Thank you.